Shalom and welcome back to Che Languages. A little over 3 months ago I made a video about forgotten languages in the Caucasus. It is important to reiterate that these languages are not actually related, however, as there are 3 language families native to the Caucasus Mountains: Kartvelian, formerly South Caucasian, Northwest Caucasian, sometimes referred to as the Circassian Abkhaz languages, and Northeast Caucasian, which contains languages such as Chechnya. Despite their names, none of these language families are related, at least as far as we know. But today we're going to talk about 3 languages, each coming from one of these language families each. So let's begin. Yalla. The first language we're going to talk about is a Kartvelian language located in Georgia and, depending on who you're talking to, Abkhazia. The language in question is Zvan, spoken in Svaneti in northwestern Georgia. It's a neighbor to Mingrelian, which we spoke about in the previous video on Caucasian languages. In Zvan itself, they call the language Lushnunin, which means our language. One thing that stuck out to me is how close the word Lushnu is to the Hebrew Lashon, which is another word for language, and many Jewish diaspora languages use the word, such as Lushan Kodesh in Yiddish and Lishan Didan in Judeo-Neo-Aramaic. However, I'm not sure if Lushnu is the word for language or if it is Nin. I don't speak Svan clearly. It might be a coincidence, but I just had to point it out. In Georgian, however, it's simply called Svanuri Ena. Ena, I know, means language, which means that perhaps Nin is related, and the coincidence with Lashon and Lushnu really isn't a coincidence at all. A survey stated that there are 14,000 speakers. However, other estimates put the number somewhere between 30 to 80,000. Svaneti is a mountainous and isolated region of Georgia, which is precisely why it's been able to develop and diverge so much throughout history. Even the Russian Empire struggled to colonize the area. On the topic of Russia, they left their influence on Svan in the form of insults and curse words, as the language naturally doesn't have any. It seems hard to believe, but maybe the Svan people are just very kind. Svan makes up its own branch within the Kartvelian languages, and it is sometimes referred to as the oldest Kartvelian language, due to its very conservative features, and preserves older features of grammar and phonology that have now been lost in Georgian, Mingrelian and Laz. Despite this, it's not all one solid language, as the mountainous terrain has led to at least 4 dialects developing, which are grouped within the upper and lower Svan dialect groups. As I mentioned, Svan preserves some older phonemes now lost in Georgian, ergo the large consonant inventory. There are also a large number of vowels, though most of them are simple ones with a distinction between long and short vowels. The script is Mechedruli, the same as Georgian, but it has been modified with some extra letters to represent all the phonemes that are not present in standard Georgian. Some of these letters are not new per se, but rather used to be written in Georgian text in the past, but fell out of use after the sounds disappeared. Others, like phi for example, were taken from Greek. That being said, the language is not often written, but road signs in Svaneti can be found in the Svan language, and I also have this sample text here with the translation above. I'm sorry to anyone who cannot read the Mechedruli scripts, but I couldn't get an accurate transliteration except for the one below. I highly recommend learning the Georgian scripts, however. It's quite fun and looks beautiful. However, there's not much more to say about Svan for now, so we're going to move on to the next language. So the next language is spoken in a region that I actually mentioned in the last section. This is the Abkhaz language, which is spoken in Georgia again. However, if you ask the kind of person that also claims Putin is cleansing Ukraine of neo-Nazis and that Karabakh is called Artsakh, they'll most likely tell you that the language is spoken in Abkhazia, one of the 2 Russian puppet states in Georgia that is located here in the northwest of Georgia and uses this flag. The people themselves actually call the language Apsua or Apsha, and it surprisingly has 190,000 speakers. It is a part of the Abazgi branch of the Northwest Caucasian languages, which distances it from the Caucasian languages. The other Abazgi language is Abaza, spoken across the border in Russia, but it is basically the same language, but a different literary dialect as far as I'm aware. There is a possibility that Abkhaz, or at least its ancestor, was attested as long as 2,500 years ago on pieces of ancient Greek pottery, shown to be an exotic language from a far-off land. There's an article I will link in the description about it, but just know that the theory is not fully proven. What is proven is that for centuries, Abkhaz has had extensive contact with Georgian, and the Abkhaz people were part of Georgian kingdoms throughout the centuries. That all changed when the Russian Empire colonized the region and pushed back the Abkhaz people into the mountains, letting only Russians settle across the coast. This has led to most people in Abkhazia today using Russian to communicate on a day-to-day basis alongside their native Abkhaz, as well as Abkhaz itself having Russian influence. However, the phonology definitely isn't Russian, which definitely does remind me of Adiga from the last video, a Caucasian language. Also similar to Adiga, Abkhaz uses a modified Cyrillic script. However, once again, this wasn't always the case, and the Georgian government still uses an official Kartvelianization, albeit modified. Just for extra measure, here's the Latin script that was used briefly in the 1920s and 30s, which features some interesting unique letters like this, and this, and this, etc. Thankfully for Abkhaz, we have a sample of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Mechadruli, Cyrillic, and a modern Latin transliteration. Despite the similarities in relation, Abkhaz is not at all similar to Adiga or any Caucasian language. By comparison with the sample text, here's the Adiga version just to remind you all, but for now we're going to move on to the final language spoken in Russia. The final language on this list is a Northeast Caucasian language that forms one of the many languages spoken in the Dagestan region. Despite being small in numbers and area, Agul is a unique language spoken by people with a really cool flag in this area. Excuse my pronunciation, but the native name is Agul Chal. As I mentioned before, it's a small language with only a little over 29,000 speakers, all concentrated in Russian Dagestan with the exception of 32 recorded speakers in Azerbaijan. Agul is part of the Samorsut branch of the Lezgic branch of the Northeast Caucasian languages. Sadly, there isn't really a whole lot to say about Agul and its history, but we can look at its phonology. One thing that always sticks out to me is that despite the three Caucasian language families not being related, they all seem to have similar phonology, which I presume comes down to millennia of language contacts between these groups. This isn't just different Caucasian languages either, as taking a look at the vowels, we see the W-looking vowel, known as a closed-back unrounded vowel, which is incredibly typical of Turkic languages, and makes me suspect that this could be because of contact with either Kumyk or Azeri, which have historically been very prevalent in the region. We all know the drill by now. When a language is located in Russia, we can be 99% certain that it uses the Cyrillic script shown here. Finally, we have a sample of Agul from the New Testament, which is funny considering that the majority of Agul speakers are Sunni Muslims. There is a transliteration below, but it's important to note that this is not an official romanization. Despite looking at Chechen last time, Agul seems completely different, and I've never really seen anything like it. It seems very unique, and it's a shame that it's such a small language that's on its way out. But for now, that's all we have time for today. Thank you all for watching, and thank you for watching my last video on language isolates. It's become quite successful and people seem to enjoy it, so I might talk about that next time. As for now, I'd appreciate it if you could show the channel some support. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Yalla, להתראות.